So a lot of people have asked us about Dan's experience with COVID, so we thought we would just make a video and hopefully answer everybody's questions, and he can just talk about what he went through.
Yeah, so it started August 23rd, a Sunday. When I had symptoms, I didn't know they were symptoms of COVID yet, but I had extreme fatigue Sunday night where I just didn't really want to go anywhere. I didn't think anything of it. So I just stayed home from an event that we were going to go to. And then the next morning I felt okay to go to work. So again, didn't have a fever or anything. So I went to work on Monday, had a little fatigue, didn't get any worse. Tuesday, still didn't get any worse. I went to work. Still had a little fatigue, but by Tuesday night, all of a sudden the fever hit me hard. Started to go above 100. I think I went up to about 103. And that's when Lindsay instructed me to get a COVID test. And even before the test, I woke up the next morning and realized I couldn't smell anything. And then that's kind of the telltale sign that I knew that it had to be COVID, which I was like, crap. But I went and got tested Thursday, so the day after I got my positive result. And by that time I was fever, ache, chills, headache, which was really bad. That would be intermittent, but when it was hitting me, it was really, really bad. Tylenol would not touch the headache. And then as the week went on, my chest started to hurt a little bit more and more. Didn't think anything of it because I convinced myself I was going to be a mild case because, you know, I'm young and healthy. And then Friday is when I noticed when I would get up to go to the bathroom, I was quarantined into my room, so I'd wear a mask in the house. That when I came back from the bathroom from downstairs, I would get really, really winded. I'd have to rip my mask off as soon as I got into my room and catch my breath. And of course I didn't tell Lindsay any of this because I just thought, oh well, I'm just sick. Well, I told her, what did I say at night?
You said that if your breathing got any worse, you'd have to go in.
Right.
So then I had my friend bring me a pulse ox from Walgreens to check his oxygen saturation. And at home, it was getting into the mid-80s. So we decided at that point to take him to the ER. So the girls and I were on quarantine, on a 14-day quarantine from our last exposure to Dan. So I had to drive him to the ER where I work and just drop him off and leave. I wasn't allowed to go in because I'm on quarantine and COVID patients aren't allowed any visitors in the hospital. So I think that was one of the hardest things for me, was to just drop him off and go. I knew he was in good hands with my coworkers, but I wanted to be there. So then I came back home, and the first day in the ER, they did like the full COVID workup on him. He had a elevated D-dimer, which is like tells you about clotting. So they did a CT of his chest to make sure he didn't have any clots in his lungs. That was okay. He wasn't requiring any extra oxygen at that time, but he was still pretty short of breath. He was breathing pretty fast. His lungs looked like he had COVID pneumonia. So they admitted him to the hospital at that point. He went up to the floor. He was still on oxygen, or wasn't on oxygen yet.
Yeah.
That didn't come until the next day.
Yeah, because every morning I would get worse.
Mm-hmm.
Every morning my oxygen would start to drop. So I would say, yeah, the next morning is when I was starting on oxygen. So they started me on like 1 liter of oxygen, and at that point that was enough to do the trick to keep my oxygen at least stable. It was still low 90s, just sitting there, and every time I got up it would drop. At that point my other symptoms, my fever was gone pretty much the day after. I still couldn't smell yet. My headache was there, which was still just awful. And then I think, each morning it would just get worse. So then the next morning, I remember they put me on 4 liters of oxygen. And then that wasn't enough. And then I need to do 6. And then eventually I went to 10.
Yeah, and I think when you went to 10 and your sats were still like in the 80s, high 80s, that's when they moved him to the ICU. And he required high flow oxygen at that time. So
which just means that I got a different cannula for my nose to get more flow in there. And I think at that point I was at 12 or 15 liters of oxygen. Then I was up in the ICU, and again another morning came, and my oxygen saturation dropped again, and then the next step they put me on high flow, which was another device, and I'll probably post some pictures with it, even though they're not pretty. A device that actually gave me humidity too, because my nose would get so dry, but it would be warm humidity, which actually felt good. But they put me up, I got up to 35 liters of oxygen.
At 80% oxygen.
Yeah, 80% concentration.
I didn't even know they could go that high, and I've been in the ER for 6 years now. Yeah. Any patient that would have required that much oxygen in the ER would have been intubated. So it was terrifying for me, because I knew how I would treat that situation. And pre-COVID, anybody would have been intubated. We just have learned new guidelines, and they tried not, as COVID progressed, they tried to not intubate as much. Yeah. So he was, even when he was on 25 liters of oxygen, they stood him up from the
35.
bed. Well, I think it was when you're on 25. When you stood up from the bed to the chair, his sats dropped down to like 72 on that much oxygen.
Yeah.
So that was pretty terrifying. And the whole time, I wasn't allowed to be there. Dan was there by himself with the healthcare providers, and the girls and I were quarantined at home by ourselves. So he got the convalescent plasma, which is plasma or antibodies that they've taken from people who've had COVID. Recovered from COVID. He got that on either like Tuesday or Wednesday.
Yeah, I was still on the floor, so
it
was Monday or Tuesday.
But his COVID symptoms actually got better after he had that. The headache, the smell, the body aches, all of that went away. In fact, the hospital has said if those symptoms hadn't gone away as fast as they did, he would have for sure been intubated. Yeah. They brought up intubation 3 times.
And I said no.
He said no, but he was basically at the max of what they could do. They did move to CPAP then, which is, I know a lot of people who have sleep apnea wear them at night, but it's a mask that you wear, and it pushes positive pressure to pop open your lungs.
Yeah, and the difference was that it was giving me probably about the same amount of oxygen that the high flow was, and it was actually comforting, besides it being a big thing on my face and me having tubes everywhere. It was comforting because it helped me open my lungs, and I felt like I could breathe better, and I never felt like I was in distress with breathing, and I think they call that
happy hypoxia.
Yeah, which basically, what is that?
It just means that you don't feel like you're short of breath. Like somebody with oxygen, and this is like a COVID thing. A lot of people, if their oxygen is that low, they're going to be in distress, and they're going to feel like they're suffocating, where he kind of was like, just sitting here, I'm okay, like didn't feel super terrible, which is scary because your oxygen is that low and you don't necessarily feel that terrible. So everybody kept saying like, Dan looks really good, he looks good on the phone, but his vitals were telling me something else. So it was really hard to wrap my mind around, especially since I wasn't there. I wasn't allowed to be there.
Yeah, and it was. I mean, I'm laid back and
I'm not.
and I felt I knew I was gonna be okay. And I just want to thank you to anybody who prayed for me, because the prayers worked, and I felt really at peace. I felt God was there with me throughout the whole thing, and I just felt Him saying, "You're gonna be okay," and this was a learning experience. I think we both learned a lot from it, and hopefully to make another video about that.
Yeah, we're gonna make another video about that. But so then he started to turn around. So it was hard because every day in the hospital he got worse. I guess I expected him to start getting better, but every day for the first 6 days he got worse and worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
And then so he was on all kinds of medications. He was on steroids, he was on inhalers, he was on antivirals, which they had to take him off because it elevated his liver enzymes. He was on antibiotics, blood thinner, which he's still on now. So he was on a lot of different medications.
Yeah.
And then I don't remember what day it was, but you just kind of started to get
Thursday, or I think it was Thursday or Friday.
Just started to respond, and then they slowly started decreasing oxygen.
Well,
actually, not slowly. It was pretty.
This is where I think there's an answer to prayer, because I went from 35 liters of oxygen one day to 6 liters.
It's huge.
Because you were like,
I thought he
wow.
was going to go down like 2 at a time, and it was
Yeah.
going to take him a month to get out of the hospital.
Yeah, which is not uncommon
Right.
to hear. So I went down to 6 liters of oxygen, and then the next day or two they moved me back down to the floor, and just kept kind of decreasing my oxygen. I was still on doing all the meds, still doing the breathing treatments. Like Lindsay said, they took me off the antiviral. My numbers did start to come down, and I was able to breathe better with less oxygen. And I think it was like Saturday or Sunday. I think it was maybe Sunday. Yeah, it was Sunday. They after a breathing treatment. Good thing we're not saying names. Somebody forgot to turn the oxygen back on.
I might be friends with them on Facebook.
Oh. Well.
Just kidding.
Well, thank you, because that allowed me to realize that I was doing better, because my oxygen was staying stable.
Yeah, he called me. He's like, "Don't freak out, but they forgot to turn the oxygen back on." And I was like, "What?" And he's like, "Actually, my stats are about 92." I'm like, "All right,
Yeah.
okay."
That might have been more than that at that
Yeah.
point, but I would still get up and they would drop a little bit. But the next time I get a breathing treatment, I just mentioned it, and they're like, "Oh, well, your sats are good," so they took away the cannula, and I think so Sunday night I slept without any oxygen, and then Monday
We got discharged on Labor Day.
Yeah.
He was very weak. Like,
I had a little adrenaline. though.
yeah, Monday, your discharge day was good. I mean, we
Yeah.
had dinner, we walked around a little bit, and then the next 2 days were kind of brutal.
Yep.
They were pretty, like, he was still, I have pulse oxes at home. He was still dropping down to like 88, still breathing very heavily, still having chest pain, still being very fatigued, and could only really, we couldn't even finish a meal without you having to go lay down.
Right.
Because you're just so fatigued and tired. And
For not moving for 10
right.
days.
He's lost a ton of muscle mass just from laying in bed for 10 days. He barely, for 5 of those days, he was barely moving at all.
Yep.
He was so short of breath and weak.
It'd be enough to get myself to get up to go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we had a few rough days, and slowly he's been increasing his activity, but still is definitely not back to 100%. And it's been a month.
Yeah, a week ago I went to my primary, and I went up 2 flights of stairs and almost passed out, and realized, okay, I am.
Which is insane, because the week before you got sick, you were like at the top of your game, squatting and bench pressing, and
I was getting pretty strong. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so and then at my doctor's appointment, they did chest X-rays, and my doctor was like, "Well, yeah, no wonder you're out of breath, your lungs still look like crap.
A lot of people have asked us, like, why Dan? Like, Dan, before he got sick, was like a epitome of health. Like, we eat very clean, he exercises all the time, and he has zero comorbidities. He's never been really sick.
Right.
But his primary care doc and the pulmonologist both had made comments that athletes tend to get hit harder with these illnesses because they're constantly pushing their bodies to new levels. They're constantly pushing their bodies and they're under stress, so that when they get sick, they have zero reserves left, so they have nothing to fight with. They, like when you get done with a workout and you got to climb up a flight of stairs, you're tired because you exerted yourself. Where that's where higher level athletes are always at the top of their, they're always using,
levels.
and they're always using everything that they have
Yeah.
left over. They have no reserves. So that's the theory about why Dan got so sick.
Because I was just coming off, it was 2 months post-show for my bodybuilding, so I was still trying to regulate my body back into a normal state. So there was definitely some...
And you were really hitting it hard at the gym.
And I was really, really, really pushing it hard. Which it doesn't mean you shouldn't push hard in the gym, it's just that's probably what affected me, because I was just immunosuppressed at that point. I think give it a couple more months down the road, I probably would have been able to fight it off a lot better. But because we've known a few people who've had it and barely had any symptoms.
Right. The girls and I didn't get sick either,
At all.
and we had been sharing drinks when Dan was probably the most contagious, living in the same house, and we had people over on Tuesday, and we'd been in contact with a decent amount of people, and nobody else had symptoms.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, let's, we don't want to spend too much time. It's already a long video, but if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or Lindsay. And I know can be kind of a scary time and a scary thing. But I think, the majority of people are not gonna get as sick as I am. But it can happen, and it can be scary.
Yeah, we don't want to scare anybody, because this is just it's part of our journey in our life and our story, and we have a testimony from it, which we'll share with you guys